Welcome to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. Tonight, we're going to talk about green transportation. We know that we're facing unprecedented weather disasters, hurricanes, floods, droughts, fires that are costing us billions of dollars in lives and property damage. And we know that this increase in weather disasters is being caused by changes in our climate systems. We also know that these climate changes are being caused by global warming, and that's the increase in the average of our planet's surface temperature. And our planet is warming because we're increasing the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. We're basically turning our planet into a greenhouse. So we need to reduce the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere to stop global warming so that our climate patterns will quit changing and causing so many weather-related disasters. So how do we do this? How do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? How do we reduce the amount of carbon being pumped into the air? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency reports that the transportation sector is responsible for 14% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. That's our cars, trucks, trains, planes, ships, all vehicles burning fossil fuels that release carbon into the air. And we can stop. The latest advances in electric cars have made them more efficient and cheaper to operate than gas. The writing's basically on the wall. General Motors is already committed to the elimination of all new gas vehicles by 2035, and the rest of the industry is following suit. Mass transportation is rapidly moving to electric buses and streetcars. Electric bullet trains are connecting large regions of Asia and Europe at speeds far faster than traditional diesel engines. Electric commuter flights are already in the air in Hawaii and the Middle East. And NASA has started demonstrations of electric propulsion systems that are expected to produce fully electric commuter flights and hybrid electric long-haul flights within the decade. So the electrification of the transportation industry is well underway. But people are starting to ask other questions. How much transportation do we need? Are there better ways to live? For instance, do we need to commute to work? What does the city of the new future look like? How do we re-image transportation? We're joined on Zoom by Gwen Moore, Curator of Urban Landscape and Community Identity with the Missouri Historical Society. Hi, Gwen.
Hi, how are you?
Romona Taylor-Williams, activist, community organizer, and co-founder of the Northside Community Benefits Alliance and the Metropolitan St. Louis Coalition for Inclusion in Industry. Hi, Romona.
Hi, how are you?
David Henry, pedestrian rights activist and co-founder of Walkable St. Louis. Hi, David.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
George Bauer-Buis, computer scientist and rail transport advocate. Hi, John. Jeremy Bauer with the St. Louis Green Party. Jeremy. And Cris Mann with Casey Greens and host of the Heartland Labor Forum. Hi, Cris.
Hi, Bob. Glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone. David, let's start with you. The Federal Highway Administration reports that 20% of all trips are less than 1 mile and 50% of all trips are less than 3 miles. 3 miles is nothing on a bicycle, and a mile is an easy walk for most of us. So active transportation, that's walking and biking. How important is it?
Well, I think it's very important. And I got involved in pedestrian advocacy because, when I was growing up, I used to walk to school and walk to the park and whatnot and get around on bike and walking. And what I discovered when my kids started to go to school is that most kids did not walk to school anymore. They're driven by their parents, which adds to the traffic in the mornings. And the other thing, in looking at it in greater detail, we've given over our cities to automobiles. At this point, we have cities that are built more around automobiles than they are around people. And I see that as a serious problem that needs to be addressed.
You work as a walk bike advocate. What does that work look like?
Well, when I was working with Walkable St. Louis, I worked with the regional planning organization in St. Louis, and we worked on a bicycle pedestrian regional plan, which had some improvements that would improve accessibility for biking and walking in the St. Louis region. But the thing that I've realized since then is that we really can't just work around the edges anymore. We have so little time to address climate change that we have to start taking more bold action. And so what I'd like to talk about is some of the efforts of taking large parts of a city and making them car-free and making them dedicated to pedestrians and bicycles, so that we can start to wean ourselves from the dependence on automobiles.
Please do tell us more about that. I mean, how do we take an urban area like St. Louis or other large metropolis area and remove cars and buses? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, and there have been projects that have been worked on for decades. I know that Market Street in San Francisco, right before the pandemic, they closed down Market Street there to automobile traffic. And there was a lot of concern before that happened that somehow that would affect all the businesses along Market Street, or that there'd be a great increase in traffic on the side streets. And that didn't come to pass. What happened was it actually improved businesses on Market Street, and buses moved more quickly. So they were actually able to move more people along Market Street when they took the private automobile off. Similar things have been happening around the country and around the world. In New York, 14th Street recently shut down to private automobiles. Again, there was a big uproar about how it would affect business and so on. And again, the results have been phenomenal. It has not affected traffic on the side streets, and it has improved the movement of people along 14th Street. So, and it has improved the businesses along there. So there's some great examples that we can learn from and use those models.
So the model you're seeing here in the United States is taking a section of road and just closing that road, turning it into a pedestrian beltway.
Right, but in some cities, well, in Europe, they're talking about closing off entire city centers to private automobiles and dedicating it to transit, biking, and walking.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because I've had the opportunity to travel in Europe. It seems like a lot of their cities there, the urban core is totally off limits. You park on the periphery of the city, and then there are mass transit options if you don't want to walk. But the cities are pretty much all pedestrian based. Cris,
Right.
did you have a question or comment?
Well, I just wanted to add to what David said. Jeff Speck has a short 16-minute video on YouTube, which he is an urban designer. And in this talk, he says that obesity, as everybody knows, is a epidemic in the United States, and that 1 out of every 3 adults in our country is obese. And the medical definition, I believe, is 30 or more pounds overweight. So, and this is connected to lack of movement, to the lack of walking, to the lack of bicycling, to the lack of just moving, getting outside.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that.
Right. I mean, it's a big problem all over the country, and we find that the areas where there is more walking, there is less obesity as well. So when there's more car dependence, there tends to be more obesity.
Active transportation, and that's referring to transport that doesn't involve a motor, so transport that requires some sort of physical activity to move around. Obviously, there's a lot of health benefits to that. I mean, we're talking about climate hours, so climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, reducing those, and the role of transportation in that. But there always seems to be this correlation between helping the planet and also helping our health. When we deal with active transportation, we're not only reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, our personal carbon footprint by a large amount, but we're improving our health while we're doing that.
Yeah, and we seem to forget that air pollution really is a major cause of death in this country. If you look at deaths from traffic, from automobiles and traffic, it's approximately 40,000 people per year. But if you add in the asthma and the deaths, premature death due to air pollution, it's up to about 90,000 people per year. that die prematurely from the use or overuse of automobiles.
Walking, biking. So there's a lot of benefits from that. What about psychological benefits, just in terms of green spaces and more trees? I mean, what are you hearing about that?
Well, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we've done over the past 100 years is to give our cities over to automobiles, which includes not only the streets but all of the associated space that the automobile takes, all of the parking spaces. When you add all of that up, we're using about 40 to 60% of our cities to accommodate these automobiles. And so much of that could be green space. And that's what you see too, when you do take back some of that land from automobiles, a lot of that, there are opportunities for green space as well.
How do we go about moving towards these green spaces? I mean, you kind of raise a big picture of saying, let's eliminate cars from our urban cores, kind of that European model of parking on the periphery and then walking or, some sort of transit. How do we as Americans, how do we move in that direction?
Well, and I mentioned I was involved in a regional plan and we were trying to improve access, but I really think it's time for the big, bold moves. I mean, we've just come through a pandemic. We know that when there's a crisis, we have to act fast and we have to do things. A lot of cities shut down lanes of traffic. They took over parking spaces. They even shut down roads during the pandemic. So we know we can do these things when there's a crisis. It meant that there was far less air pollution. It meant that people got out and were able to walk. Well, in that case, they needed the social distancing. They needed the extra space for that. But some cities have looked into making that more permanent. Seattle is talking about keeping some of those streets closed that they closed during the pandemic. Other cities are looking in that direction too. And I think that's the kind of bold move we need to consider at this point.
It's very interesting. Gwen, you're the curator of urban landscape and community identity. Tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about your work and how transportation plays into that.
Well, let me say that my position at the Missouri Historical Society has given me an opportunity to really focus on my childhood neighborhood. My focus is African American history. And what I've been doing for a number of years is looking at a community called Mill Creek, which was the largest Black community in the city of St. Louis until 1959, when it was destroyed by the twin policies of urban renewal and highways. It was a walkable neighborhood. I call it a city within a city. It was between downtown St. Louis, which was the corporate business leaders, the Central Business District, and St. Louis University, which was a major university. So sandwiched between these two powerful entities, this university and corporate leaders, was this Black community that was occupying this valuable land. And unfortunately, not for us, Black people that lived there, we were in the way. We were considered a block on progress. And so they used these tools of a highway system and urban renewal to actually level this neighborhood. They removed all 20,000 people. There were 20,000 people living there, 5,000 dwellings, 839 businesses, schools, churches, 42 churches. It was, I call it a city within a city. And it was a walkable city within a city. Wherever we went as children, like David said, we walked everywhere. We walked to school, we walked to the store, we walked to the library, we walked to the movies. Everywhere we went, we walked. I can't remember even riding a bus or a streetcar as a child, because we walked everywhere. And because segregation, we couldn't really go much outside of our communities. So we had this walkable community. We have this community that people are trying to get back to today. And in fact, if Mill Creek were allowed to exist, if it wasn't totally destroyed, it would probably be the neighborhood of choice. It would probably be the ideal neighborhood to represent what we want to get back to now today, which is the walkable city. So I've been studying Mill Creek for a number of years, and I consider myself fortunate that my work allows me to even study my childhood community.
So in studying that neighborhood, when we talk about walkable cities moving forward, when we talk about David's image of an urban core without vehicles, you're defining a city that was once there that maybe had all those characteristics.
Absolutely. Like I said, it had everything. We barely, I can't remember leaving my community, maybe on a few occasions, when my mother would go to Suloid Market, which was the local farmers market. And then we would drive. That was the only time we would ever drive. Everywhere else we walked. Our church was in the community, our school was in the community, the movie theater was in the community, the grocery store was in the community. Everything was in the community. So we walked everywhere. Cars were a luxury and rarely used.
You're describing a situation where big transportation perhaps came in, used eminent domain to shut down your community and build highways through there for the allegedly greater good of the public. But
absolutely, it was eminent domain. My childhood home is now part of Highway 64. That highway, it was at that time, it was called the Daniel Boone Expressway. Went straight through Mill Creek. So that was one reason why Mill Creek had to go. But it had to go also because it was valuable land. I'm not imputing any motives to St. Louis University, but St. Louis University was able to expand east because Mill Creek was gone. The business district, which thought that this Black neighborhood was really, which was just ringing downtown St. Louis, was actually a break on businesses. They wanted to get people from the suburbs. Of course, all this was happening at the same time. The 1956 Highway Act was passed. Mill Creek, the urban renewal was flourishing in the 1950s, late 1950s, early 1960s. Suburbanization after World War II. And you had to get those white suburbanites to downtown St. Louis, and they didn't want to go through a Black neighborhood. They would have to go through Mill Creek to get to downtown St. Louis. They did not want to see Black people. I'll just be honest. So you can get on the highway, go from the suburbs to downtown St. Louis and bypass this Black neighborhood. But bypassing the Black neighborhood wasn't enough. The Black neighborhood had to go. And I know that people now, or cities are now rethinking highways, which I think is a good thing. That we want to repurpose them. Mm-hmm. And I think even in Biden's infrastructure bill, they're thinking about ways to not just keep building highways, but to maybe dismantle highways, because they have actually contributed to the ruination of the cities. We're talking about the deterioration of cities, and highways have a lot to do with that.
Yeah, we're talking about how transit not only affects our planet, greenhouse gas emissions, affects our health in terms of, diseases and sedentary, but they're obviously affecting communities too. David, do you want to comment on this?
Right, yeah, what Gwen was talking about. There are now a number of projects that have dismantled inner city highways and turned them into pedestrian areas. And the one thing, in some ways it may try to remedy what happened, but I don't think it does. And I think the caution is that when that happens, what you don't want to do is to bring in an area that will force existing residents out. So it has to be done carefully with sufficient things like inclusive zoning, where you have a certain amount of affordable housing and where you protect those who are already owning homes there, so that they're not going to be priced out by property taxes.
Well, what I understand is that there will be a racial equity component that you are going to consult the people, because Mill Creek was destroyed. Nobody cared what Black people in Mill Creek thought about what was happening. They didn't consult them. They didn't care. They didn't have a voice. And I think that's something that's going to change, that people will have a voice.
Yes.
Will have some, I don't know if they'll have control, but they will have some say in what's going to happen to that community.
Very good. Gwen, you describe a community where you didn't travel much, where, well, like you say, your grocery store is there, the movie house is there, your work is there, everything's your schools, all within walking distance.
Mhm.
I mean, we've evolved into a society where everything's distributed. You know, if we want to go shopping, we may drive for half an hour to reach a mall, or we may drive all day going to a dozen different stores to get what we need. You know, often we're commuting to work that is the other side of the metro area. Um, how does that play into the future? Are we? I mean, I'm hearing people propose that we move back to the community Gwen describes, the community where what we need is within walking distance, is close to us. That we move away from this idea of being a metro-wide environment. What are your thoughts on that, David?
Right. Well, yeah, as part of that, you know, when those large interstates were going through the cities and just destroying viable neighborhoods at the same time, part of that too was the zoning that took place that restricted mixed uses of neighborhoods, where you would have a neighborhood that's walkable so you could walk down to the corner store and so on. Instead, they had this residential zoning where it could only be residential. And that, in fact, exacerbated the problem because people had to drive to get to any business, to shop and so on. So yeah, that definitely we have to get back to mixed use zoning.
So that's what I'm hearing you say. You're referring to mixed use zoning. We have to change our zoning laws so that we can start creating these inclusive communities that have, our grocery store, all the drugstores, all that within walking distance of our homes.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I noticed Romona had her hand up.
Did you, Romona?
Yes, Gwen, you really, really, really sparked and brought back a lot of memories. And one of the things that I would like to lift up is what Gwen described, and what she has studied for many years now, is one of the very reasons why I ended up in the work that I am in and have been in for the last 30 years, because I did not grow up in Mill Creek, but I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, on what was called the South Side. And urban renewal, 6 months after my parents purchased their home, finished paying for their home, and burnt the mortgage, as we called it, urban renewal came through and totally dismantled our community. There was such, if we look at it from an economic perspective, the ability to transfer wealth from one generation to the next generation was significantly impeded. So Mill Creek, we could take Mill Creek and overlay it in my community, which was the same identical thing. And we will have, and then multiply that, add the multiplier effect, and then do that across this country, and both in major urban centers, then you will see that the same thing has taken place. And we wonder why. We wonder why we have the social issues that we have in our communities today. During that process, we also saw white flight take place. And now we are seeing the reversal of white flight, and the children of those folks who fled back in the 60s, the 70s, after Brown versus Kansas, which had a significant impact on white flight. Then those children and their children's children are now moving back into the communities because they don't want the sterile living environment of the suburban areas. And they are doing that in the name of creating walkable communities and reducing carbon emissions, which is something that is needed. So Gwen, I would like to thank you for lifting that up and sharing your story, and know that our stories are sister stories.
Yeah, sure.
So Ramona, you feel like you're saying this is being done in the name of climate change, reducing climate change. Do you feel like this is a threat to the current urban societies, urban communities?
I think climate change is a threat to the planet itself, but
Mm.
it has a disproportionate threat on low wealth and communities of color that have been excluded from the climate change discussions, from the planning. And I think we also have to look at the impact that planning has had on our communities and that planning is having on the climate and the way that we are approaching climate change. It's being approached in a very unequitable manner, unequitable way. Our communities are excluded. I participated in the bike plan, right? The bike plan. I'm no longer in St. Louis, but I was there for 11 years and I fought day and night for North St. Louis and continue to do so. In the bike plan. Well, when they were developing the bike plan, guess what? There wasn't no people at the table that looked like me.
Yeah.
And they did not eat. And the way that they initially outlined the bike plan, they outlined that bike plan and excluded North St. Louis, just like the banks exclude our communities in there when they draw their assessment.
Mhm.
So yes, it definitely has an impact. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that is, if you did not consider that and you just went ahead with, let's say, these walkable community plans, then it would force people out who are there because property taxes would go up, rents would go up, and that has to
Mhm.
be built into the plan at this point.
Well, gentrification must be minimized. It has to be. You know, we can't even think of talking in about sustainability and also without looking at the impact of gentrification and how gentrification played a significant role even after urban renewal.
Yeah.
Renewal was just to remove us out. And those people who remained, we were then moved out through gentrification.
Exactly. Yeah, I just want to say something very briefly that I agree with you 100%. That's one of the concerns when we're talking about repurposing highways and maybe people rethinking, do we need all these highways, and the ones that we have, do we need to do something else with them? And one of the concerns is with the people that were left living along the highways, which were usually African Americans.
Yes.
And now that you're trying to lure people back into these communities, these what we call legacy residents, what's going to happen to us?
Mhm.
Are we going to be displaced again?
Yeah.
So I think it's really critical that the people that are living along these highways, whose lives have been disrupted by these highways, still have a voice in what happens and can still remain in these revitalized communities, which so often doesn't happen. And that's a lot of the fears of the people that are living in these communities now.
Very true. You're listening to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. We're talking about green transportation. How do we address these communities? And maybe Ramona, you want to continue talking about this. How do, as we're moving towards the future of transportation, you know, the walkable cities David's talking about, how do we address the needs of the current communities? Your work as an advocate and a community organizer, what have you seen and what would you like to see in the future?
I think the number one in St. Louis, for instance, we really do not have an infrastructure in place for it to achieve a resident-led, place-based move from back into the direction of walking communities. Our communities have all, as Gwen said, our communities have always been walkable and bikeable. And the reason why they've been walkable and bikeable, a lot of it is because of poverty, segregation, as Gwen noted. St. Louis is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So an automobile in many of our communities, as she said, is a luxury. We have to also look at the built environment. What happened to the north side of St. Louis is probably one of the most egregious, vicious attacks on the Black community that I have ever experienced and witnessed. And it was done systemically, and it was done intentionally. And now you have an entire quadrant of a city that has been basically laid to waste without investment in the infrastructure, without investment in the built environment. If you look at this agency called LRA, LRA in the city of St. Louis is the #1 landowner, but not only are they the #1 landowner, they are the #1 slum owner. They created an entire area of the town as into slum. So if we want to get to this, we got to first begin with putting an infrastructure in place that will provide education, that will attract resources into our communities. And those resources should come into the hands of the people who live there. They should start strong community-based organization. The city of St. Louis, I think, is receiving 500 and so many millions of dollars in the American Recovery Plan. That money should be allocated into the north side of St. Louis to rebuild housing, decent, safe, and affordable housing. If they're going to demolish like they're doing, like it's this crazy bulldozing the communities down, then you know what? They need to have a plan for building houses, and not only have a plan, but a funded plan. So then we can get to making communities whole, making communities safe, looking at community from a community and economic development, a comprehensive community and economic development perspective, and changing the hearts and minds of people to understand we want our community to look just as safe, just as nice, just as adorable, just as walkable, just as bikeable as your community. And we want that not at the expense of us having to be shoved out, but we want it where we are. We love to walk. We love to bike. But when we see them come in putting down the bike marker, we know gentrification is coming. That's a #1 indicator that gentrification is on its way.
Wow. I really hadn't even thought of that pattern that way, and that's such an important point that you're making.
Yeah, I think that there have been mistakes made in the past for, and probably still being made in terms of this kind of development. But it's good to hear that there is movement, at least in Washington, for this recent bill to include participation by the local community as part of it, because that's what has been missing.
I think, and David, you're in the planning process, so it's obvious that it's very important that we bring all the communities together to plan this future of transportation, whether that's walking, biking, or anything else that affects our communities. I'd like to shift. I mean, we've been focusing on walking, biking, urban communities and such, but transportation is a lot bigger than that. We move our food all the way around the world. I mean, it's something as simple as going to the grocery store. has huge impacts on transportation and mass transit. And John, I'd like to come to you. I mean, you're our rail enthusiast, our rail advocate. Can you talk a little bit about the role of rail in this future of green transportation?
Well, I think it's going to be quite large, because if you want just if people want to get from cities that are far apart, that's going to be the mode of choice, because it can be very fast, as well as low energy compared to driving in a car or flying in an aircraft. And also that it's especially ideal for if you have, rail is already the most efficient way to move goods over land. And it can be made a lot faster as well for moving goods. And electrification is key for that, because it allows better acceleration and regenerating energy from braking.
So rail as a solution going forward, do you feel like that has a bigger role? What's the challenges to electrifying our rail? I know there's a lot of electric rail in Asia, Europe, but I don't know that we have that much long haul rail in the United States that's been electrified. Where are we at on that?
There's a lot of room for improvement there. That it's basically the only long distance line to speak of that's electrified right now is the Northeast Corridor, that Boston to DC, and going to be extended, the electrification, further south into Virginia.
Are you familiar with Solutionary Rail, the program to electrify the Northwest? What's your thoughts on that? And for our listeners, Solutionary Rail is the idea of taking existing Amtrak corridors, if you will, and going through repurposing those to electrify, obviously upgrade them, make them faster, more reliable. But also another element of that is that once they've installed the electric rail, they want to use that electric rail to move renewable energy from the Northwest to the East. So we're talking about a solution that not only provides us with fast, reliable rail transport, but also becomes a solution to our electric grid problems, because it can pick up renewable energy from those regions where it's very abundant and move those into the urban cores in the East where we need that electricity. So John, your thoughts on that? Where's that at these days?
I love that idea. I'm familiar with it. That I think it is something that we absolutely need to do more of, building power lines along rail lines, because then it makes, if the line itself isn't already electrified, it makes it a no-brainer, because you can just put substations in to reduce the voltage to connect the trains to, and you've got an electrified main line. It's beautiful.
John, you're also a computer science major, computer scientist. I know you do work in networking and such. I think COVID has demonstrated for so many of us, and we're here today on Zoom. Our listeners may be able to tell from some of the noise and pops and things that are happening, but we're from several different states here, and we're having this broadcast on Zoom through communications. What's the role? What's the potential for moving away from commuter transportation and moving towards the type of remote work that we've seen happen during this pandemic? John?
One of the things is that there's people who are turning down jobs that if they're not able to work remotely, because there are a lot of people who want that flexibility of being able to telecommute, and that it's certainly the carbon impact of not traveling to work is significant. that of if you can just get on a computer at home and then do your work, and it also is a great time savings as well, because at least on a train you can do something else not work related, but it's better still if you're at home, because then you can just go right to whatever you want to be doing. That you can just, take a walk like I enjoy doing, or play with your dog, go pick up your kids from school without having a long trip ahead of you.
Mhm.
David?
I know that where I work at the University of Wisconsin, there are a number of people there who have been working at home during the pandemic, and there are no plans to go back. So there, at that large university, there are a lot of people that will continue to work remotely. And of course, that's what I'm reading about
Yeah.
other businesses too. People will continue.
I just want to say, I think that this is reshaping the way we look at work.
Absolutely.
Before, our work, first we were coming in, not at all, then 1 day a week, then 2 day a week, now it's 3 days a week. And now they're rethinking whether we should make this sort of arrangement more permanent, where everybody doesn't come in at 9, Monday through Friday, and leave at 5. That maybe some people, maybe you don't need to come into work and be in the physical space. And of course, that's going to save you some commute time. It's going to save driving. It's going to save, I'm hoping, less pollution. So I think it'll be a boom.
Well, think about
allowed
rush
to.
hours. You're mentioning,
Yeah.
8 to 5, 8 to 9 to 5, whatever that is. I mean,
Right.
that's what's created our rush hours. And
Exactly.
if we start telecommuting, or if we stagger or don't go to work as often,
Exactly.
the rush hours go away, and we don't need those 5-10 lane highways anymore.
And let me just say something real quick. I never thought that made sense, where everybody had to go to work at 9 and leave at 5.
At 5.
Creating gridlock, creating traffic jams. Why can't you have staggered work hours? And so maybe workers are going to push back against some of these, to me, nonsensical rules that we have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm in Mississippi now. Okay.
Ah,
Uh-huh.
I'm in Mississippi now, and I've been in Mississippi since 2015. And it was very much I'm going to say it was a culture shock, but it was also, it threw me into a panic, because the city of Jackson is totally surrounded by interstate. Totally surrounded by interstate. And it's not walkable. We don't have sidewalks, and first one thing. But I work up in the Delta, and that is an entirely different world within itself. And small rural communities where there is no access. Everyone in Mississippi drives. Everyone in Mississippi drives. So up in the Delta, where you have these small, rural, very small, very rural communities, where a block for us is 2 miles there, and where communities are, we did a walk audit of the community that I'm working in, called Duck Hill, Mississippi, population of 1,184 people. And we were fortunate to be able to receive funding in order to do and to start a sustainability model. And in this little community along Route 51, there are 9 small towns and villages, and the closest grocery store, depending on where you live, can be 40, 45 miles.
wow.
And in a climate denier state, such as Mississippi, and Scarlet, folks do not want to hear about public transportation. Jackson is the largest city in Mississippi. However, its public transportation system is, it resembles, and you would think that you were back in probably, I don't know, I can't even remember where a transportation system is this ineffective.
Yeah.
So it's a very different world
Yeah.
for those of us who are living in rural areas. Yes, we're looking at ways that we can do alternative transportation because public transportation is power.
I want to address,
Yeah, go ahead, dear.
no, I was going to say, Gwen and Ramona, both of you, we were talking a little bit about telecommuting or working from home. How does that address communities of color, the poor communities? How do you see that helping or hurting your communities?
Well,
Let me just say that a lot of African Americans are essential workers.
right, essential work.
Absolutely.
And I know in my institution, most of the essential workers were African Americans.
Right.
Most of the workers that are non-essential got to stay at home and work from home, where the African Americans had to come to work every day. They did not have the luxury of doing remote work. So their lives were more at risk. Of course, that probably accounts for our higher mortality rates. So I think this is, these issues become very, very complex. The issues of racism involved, and inequality, and that affects everything in this country, as far as I'm concerned. Even with highways, there's a racial underpinning to that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And how does it affect? Well, for me, I can work from home, right? We developed a youth and an adult leadership institute. And one of the things that we found out when COVID hit was that after going through a year of planning and design and everything like that, COVID hit the week that we launched our leadership institute. And guess what? It totally disrupted everything, of course. Well, because I work in an environment where I don't know what we call ourselves now, Zoomers, right?
Well, here we are. We're Zooming.
Okay, I work in a Zoom environment, and I was just accustomed to going to webinars and everything like that. But when COVID hit, and suddenly we realized we couldn't do in-person training, and we didn't have the infrastructure to even deliver the leadership institutes virtually because people did not have broadband access. They did not have devices. They had never heard of Zoom, right? Or these digital platforms. So when we're talking about this transition that the country is going through now, and it is going through a transition, then how are we going to reimagine? And this isn't even reimagining, this is imagining, because we've not been in this space before. So it has and is happening, and as Gwen said, the majority of our people were essential workers. My daughter does natural hair. She does hair. She couldn't stop working because she's independent. She works for herself. She can't do it. She can't do folks' hair over Zoom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she needed to eat. She needed to pay her rent, and she ultimately ended up on my sofa. So those are the impacts that we're having. Very different. Like I say to folks, sustainability means different things to different people.
Absolutely.
Different things to different people.
Yeah, so the whole telecommuting thing, even that is different based on our culture and our own communities. And Jeremy, are you with us? Jerome, you're dialing, I believe.
He is.
You're a Green Party candidate. I mean, you've run for a lot of offices. Can you talk to us a little bit about the politics? I mean, how do we? I mean, is it electing the right people? How do our politicians take action on this?
Well, um, as a Green Party politician, I don't. I've run for office, public office, 9 times in the last decade. Haven't technically won a single election, but I got a lot of votes, and that means that I have people's attention. And I know that because we St. Louisans have a really big practical problem on our hands. The Loop Trolley, $52 million boondoggle. The last time I checked, the bill goes up about $1 million every year. And if we can't get that running again, we're stuck with a $25 million bill. So that is a really big problem. As a politician, I'm 28th Ward Green Party committee man. So I've won one election, and that's the one. And maybe that's the most important one because my duty as 28th Ward committee person is to listen to everybody. And last year, shortly before the pandemic, a friend of mine, a business manager at a local Delmar Loop restaurant, floated by me a proposal to get the trolley running again. He suggested running it as a free service and banning automobile traffic from Delmar, from the University City Public Library all the way to De Bolivar, and just make it into a bicycle path, pedestrian path, a space for street musicians to play. This will be good for business, good for the people. We can make it into a greenway, replant some trees. They cut down a lot of beautiful old trees for that project, and well, we can't bring those trees back, but we can replant them. So anyway, he asked me to float this proposal, so I did on my Facebook wall and in the St. Louis Activist Hub. And it generated an extremely lively discussion. It may still be going on for all I know. By the way, I'm almost blind now, so the reason I'm on this Zoom call is because my nephew John George has patched me in. So I have an interest in, back in Philadelphia, I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, and I bicycled everywhere in the city, and I also loved to ride the Philadelphia trolley system. It was a very practical system. And also, I had no problem crossing the trolley tracks with my bicycle. So there's no reason why trolleys and bicycles can't coexist. So anyway, now I'm almost blind. I can no longer ride my bicycle, but I love to walk. And I would very much love to walk everywhere in St. Louis that I need to go without fear of getting run over.
Absolutely.
So, the plan to make the Delmar into a bike path and a greenway appeals to me very much. And I know that we have their attention, the attention of powerful people, because last summer, in the middle of the pandemic, they did run the trolley as a free service as a trial for 1 month. And I know we have their attention. And so what I and my nephew John George will be doing for our joint presentation at our webinar on July 7th.
July 7th.
Yeah, not January, July. We will be presenting a very detailed plan on how to take back the Delmar Loop and to make it into a walkable, bikeable, scooterable greenway, and how to get the trolley running again. And John George is preparing a slideshow based on Google Maps. So he probably knows more about the geography of St. Louis than I do at this point because he knows how to use Google Maps. And so anyway, when we get this done, we're going to post it to our events Facebook page, Green Transportation Reimagined, and also to the St. Louis Activist Hub as before, and we'll crowdsource this. So that's the way it should be done. That's how politicians can get involved. listen to the people, listen to everybody, including the disabled like me. You know, I can't ride a bicycle anymore, but I love to walk, and I have a personal interest in walking where I need to go without getting run over. So anyway, we're looking forward to the webinar on July 7th.
Thank you.
John George, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cris, can you tell us more about this
Could you have
webinar? I
anything
believe
to
you
add?
helped organize that.
Yeah.
I did, but as you can tell, all of the speakers tonight are going to be talking about their areas of expertise on July 7th at the webinar. As Jerome said, on July 7th at 6:45 to 9 p.m. Central Time. And we have a little bit of everything. Not only do we have these amazing speakers all connecting things into a common thread, but we have 8, I believe, auxiliary speakers. That would be, we have a retired Amtrak conductor talking about why, for example, the United States, we cannot afford high-speed rail because our military budget is too high. For example, we have a retired auto worker speaking against car culture. We have a phys ed teacher here from Kansas City. She's going to talk about the role of movement in healthy living in our lives. And this forum, we have met for several months now, just piecing together. This effort to make healthier communities and equitable communities. Foremost, I agree with Romona. That has to be the basis of everything. So we all came together, and we're just piecing this together, what should be done next. And we hope you will join us at the forum. It's via Zoom, and you can find the link on the Facebook page, which John George will tell you again. And we just hope everyone will participate, because that's the only way it's going to change. And one way is to make whatever political party you're in, make it an activist party, because that's how things change. And the Labor Network for Sustainability says that transit is a civil right. And it is a lifeline for access to jobs, education, medical care, food, and other essentials. So join us, please, on July 7th.
John, where can they go to register? What's that URL?
Go to facebook.com/green transportation reimagined, with green transportation, the R and the I, and reimagined, those capitalized.
Okay. So on facebook.com, look for green transportation reimaged. David, reimagined. So green transportation reimagined. Well, thank you. David, where can people go if they want to learn more about your work, your organizations?
Well, I have a website where I lay out some of my thoughts, and it's also a website for the walk I took in 2013, which was 1,000 miles from the East Coast to Ohio. And it's called climate-walker.org, so people can go there.
Oh, thank you. Ramona, is there a place people can go to learn more about your work?
Well, we have a Facebook page, and if they go to ASEEDS, ASEEDS, and that stands for Achieving Sustainability Through Education and Economic Development Solutions. And they will find information about our work, about our organization. We were just featured in EPA's carousel of news in April on the Seeds Initiative, and they can also Google Duck Hill, Mississippi, and you'll get all kinds of stuff that comes up about the Seeds Initiative and the work that we're doing around sustainability and building resiliency in Mississippi.
Well, thank you. Gwen, where can people go to learn more about your work?
Well, they can go to our website, mohistory.org, or they can email me. I'd be happy to talk to anybody. gmoore@mohistory.org, either one.
Well, thank you for that. John, Jerome, is there a place people go to learn more from you?
Besides the Facebook page, some general stuff also gets posted. There's also the Gateway Greens Facebook page, and Gateway Greens have a website which should be very easy to find.
www.gateway-greens.org. So
Okay, thank you.
www.gateway-greens.org.
Very good. And Cris, you're with KC Greens. Where can people go to learn about that?
Yes, they can go to MissouriGreenParty.org.
Okay,
and
thank
click
you.
on the Kansas City chapter. There are 5 chapters in Missouri.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, and thank you to our listeners. This is the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove.